I have Megan in the studio with me. I'm so excited about this chat. Your book, Women Rising, resonated with me, and I know it's going to resonate with so many of our listeners. And I really wanted to talk with you about our big question, which is how do I silence my inner critic? But first of all, before we silence it, we really need to identify our inner critic. So, Megan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here as well. Thanks, Jess.
And how do we recognize what our inner critic is? Who is it?
Yes. So that's the brilliant first question, because for so many of us as women, we don't know that we have an inner critic. We have 60,000 thoughts a day, and we constantly hear this narrative in our heads, and we think it's us, and we think it's telling us the truth, and it's guiding us on the right path. But once we start to really understand that there is this voice in our head that is not always our friend, that in a lot of ways is the internalized patriarchy that we all deal with, and that it can be holding us back and stopping us from taking the action that we want to take, then we can really start to understand what's keeping us from being in our full, true, authentic power as women.
So, help us then recognize what that voice is. You say it's often the stories that we tell ourselves
Yes.
that keep us stuck. In your book, Women Rising, you've identified 13 of them. And there was a couple that really resonated with me. There was the imposter, the people pleaser, and the empath.
Mm.
And because in all of those, there were traits that I thought, oh, that's me. Or at different times in my life,
Yes.
I've told myself a particular story. Let's start with the imposter. I think that's very much a familiar story that many of us tell ourselves, that we're not good enough. We're not meant to be here.
Yes, and that we're the fraud. That we don't have the skills, the capabilities, the experience, the credentials to do the thing that we're actually already doing. Like you sitting here, like me sitting here as the author, and the story's going on in my head. Oh, do I know all the answers? And, all of that. I wrote the book. Like, of course I do. But there's still that story that can come up for us as women of, yes, underlying it's not good enough, but all of the archetypes have their own flavor. So that flavor for the imposter of, I'm going to get caught out, and we hear about it in terms of imposter syndrome. But what we often don't realize as women is that it's also a case of imposter system as well as imposter syndrome, in that so much of the world has not been designed with us in mind as women. And we're always, for many of us, trying to fit ourselves and squeeze ourselves into spaces and places that weren't built for us. So, one of the things that I really want women to understand about the imposter archetype is how much of that is you and your stories, and how much of that is also what I talk about in part 1, which is the paradoxes of power, and how the patriarchy really feeds that inner patriarch within us that fuels those stories of, I'm not good enough, I don't belong to be here. They're going to tap me on the shoulder and say, what are you doing in this seat, Jess? You shouldn't have a radio show or whatever it is. So yeah, that's the imposter.
And the boxes too. I know when I look back on my younger life and my younger career, I suppose, that there were many times where I thought, oh, I'm not like everyone else, but I need to be like everyone else. But because I'm not, then I'm not really meant to be here.
Yes, and that we don't fit. And so we try and conform. Did you find that for yourself?
Oh,
Like always
yes.
trying.
But then I'd try and bust out because I was adamant when I began as a news presenter, I was never going to grow my hair, even though bosses would say, we need the broadcast bob. I was like, no, I'm having short hair, and I'd stick with that. And so there'd be ways where I would be subversive. But as I've gotten older, I'm far more confident with owning being subversive and just going, well, this is me.
Yes. And it often comes for us as women in midlife. Like, I've been reflecting on this. I think we're about the same age. I'm 54.
Me too.
Yes, there you go. We're in the power years, the wisdom years. I think for so many of us as women, it can come in midlife where we finally get sick of trying to fit ourselves in, and we get tired and burnt out and exhausted, and have that, that typical midlife crisis, or like to call it an awakening of, this is who I am. Like, I'm ready to finally own all of the pieces of myself. And, when I talk about coming into our power as women, that's what I'm talking about. And I would love to see women so much younger than us not have to wait until they get to these midlife years, which I think are fabulous years, by the way, to have that awakening and that power.
And we'll get to the awakening. But for people who are listening who might be thinking, well, what are some other inner critics that I
Yes.
have that I need to silence? I think, for example, about my youngest daughter. She's 15 and she's a perfectionist.
Mhm.
And reading your book, looking at, well, this is what a perfectionist does, I'm trying to now encourage her to say, you don't have to be perfect. You
Yes.
don't need to get those top marks.
I see this with girls more than boys. I've got a 23-year-old son. And I remember when he was doing his HSC and I was watching the boys and his, boy male friends. And then I was watching all of the girls. And the girls were the ones who were pulling the all-nighters and putting so much pressure on themselves to get the perfect marks and to do all of the things. The boys were pretty chill. It's not that they weren't working, but they were very relaxed about it. And I was observing this, and this is how we are socialized as girls. And I think a lot of your listeners will relate to the perfectionist in my community of women that I support. I see it everywhere. And it is that pressure to, I'm just going to do it one more time. I'm just going to get the next qualification. I'm just, right? Because we're constantly feeling like if it's not perfect, I've failed. So, yeah,
It's all or
all or
nothing.
nothing. Yeah. No shades of grey.
Yes, why do we
Yes.
do that?
Yes.
I've done that.
Yes, I've done that, of course, as well. Yeah, like I see myself in all of it, all of the archetypes that I've written about. And for the perfectionist, one of the questions I love to ask is like, what would be good enough? If it doesn't have to be perfect, something I talk about in my business a lot with my team is like, what's the minimum viable, whatever it is? Like, let's start there. What would grace and ease look like?
Oh, grace and ease.
Mm,
Oh, I love the
yes.
combination of those two words.
Yes.
Because grace has a lovely elegance and dignity and presence about it. And ease is just, exhale, I think.
Exhale, rather than what the perfectionist does. And so many of us do as women, irrespective of what archetype we might relate to, is drive and strive. And that was my entire career until I burnt out very badly in my mid-30s. And so now I have that inherent driver and striver. But what I'm always trying to get to is, where's the grace and ease? If we took this down 5 notches, what would that look like? What would that feel like? How do we get to that? For me, for my team, for our women, for everybody. So yeah, it's a beautiful combination.
Oh, it is. And listening to you describe it in that way, I'm thinking consciously about putting my feet on the studio floor here. I've got sparkly sneakers on. I'm taking a lovely breath. So I hope with our listeners hearing you talk that they're able to exhale a little bit, to give yourself permission. Often as women, I think we don't give ourselves that permission because, as you say, we're always feeling we've got to keep going, driving and striving. Also, another sort of archetype you talk about is the people pleaser.
Yes.
And I've got to confess that there's been a lot of that within me, wanting to keep everyone else happy, and I lose myself.
Yes. And there's not many women that I meet or support or coach or teach that don't relate to the people pleaser. It is how we are cultivated as young girls. We're the ones who, help your brother and help your mum and do this and sit quietly and don't upset people. Keep the peace. And we're the nurturers. We're the empaths. We're the ones who, as we grow into women, we're taking care of all the people. We're doing all of the things. And we as women are wired for harmony. We're not wired for conflict. So when you put all of that together with, the stories and all of the things, it's very easy to get into that behavior of, I'm going to put myself over here second, and your needs come before my needs, whether that's our children, our partners, our bosses, our team members, whoever it is, our friends. And we don't know how to set boundaries.
How do you do that? This is when I was reading your book, you do talk about the importance of setting boundaries. And I still struggle with that. I really do. I'm getting better at saying no, but setting a boundary isn't just about saying no to things, is it? What do we
No.
do?
Well, the first thing about, and this is a universal struggle, so don't worry. We all of us, right? We all have it, and it does get easier. One of the reasons we can struggle so much to set boundaries as women is that we're not clear on what we want. Like, we're not clear on our agenda, and that may not be your struggle. It's a struggle that I see for so many women. When women come into one of the programs that I teach, about 95% of them don't have a vision for their life. So when I ask that first question, what's your life vision? They can't answer it because they've never put themselves
First.
They've never given themselves permission for the time, the space, the energy to say, what do I want? What do I want in this season of my life, wherever they're at? And when we don't have that clarity around what we want, we don't know, well, where do we need a boundary? And we often don't know where we need a boundary until we get resentful, we're annoyed with someone, we feel put upon, we get angry. So that's always a very good sign. If you feel any of those emotions, that you're constantly being infringed upon, that's a sign that you need a boundary.
I'm putting my hand up to all of those, and I know people listening are doing the same. That sense of resentment, that sort of irksome when you feel everyone is just taking advantage of you.
Absolutely. And like, we hear a lot about rageful women, and women who are angry. And women have a lot of right to be angry, right? Because we often just do feel like we're carrying the world on our shoulders. So clarity around what it is that you want, what is your agenda versus other people's agenda that you might always be, trying to solve for and live up to. And then, what is the boundary? Is it around when you leave work? Is it around who does the chores at home? Is it around your me time, whatever that looks like for you? And who do you need to communicate that boundary to? And what do you do when people, which they will, start tripping over your boundary, pushing back on your boundary, or ignoring it altogether? Yeah, it's an art form and a skill and a muscle that is really important for us to build as women.
And you're teaching us to do that. You're also helping to teach us silence that inner critic, which is our big question. We've spoken about a number of those archetypes. So we can recognize, okay, there is something inside of me that is saying something that isn't true. How then can we silence that and not buy into it?
Yes. This is the big question, right? I think this is one of the biggest questions for women in every aspect of our work, our lives, is to understand, what are the stories I'm telling myself, challenging those stories. And the simplest way that I know how to do that is just asking the question, is that true? And then get to the reframe. What is it? What is the action that you actually want to take? And what's a better story that's going to set you up for success? So, for example, like coming in here today for this conversation, I love you. I'm so excited to be here. And we all have different things that would trigger our inner critic. For me, doing something like this, as I said before, do I have the right answers? Is it going to be interesting? Is it going to be useful for people?
So someone who is,
of course,
an incredible award-winning leadership empowerment coach, successful best-selling author, you also still grapple with this.
Yes, absolutely. And I often say, like, there is no there. There is no magical, mystical land.
We're never there yet.
We're never there, right? We're never going to arrive, I don't believe, at a place where we've silenced that inner critic. So I use words like tame, quieten versus silence. Like, we don't want to fight with it to wrangle it down. We all have it. What gets easier, and what I've learned over the last 15 or so years of doing this work, is that the ability to recognize the story and then to challenge that story, question that story, and get to the reframe is now very fast. So before, I could get lost in an inner critic story for days, weeks, months, years even.
So keep going back over, oh, I wish I'd said that, or why did I do that, or I shouldn't have made that choice.
Yes,
Those sorts of things.
Yes, or just not doing the thing. Like, how often do we
Hold
have a
ourselves
dream
back.
and we hold ourselves back?
That's so true.
Yes.
Even though I try to be brave, even though I feel afraid, there are times where I know I've held back because I think, oh no,
Yes.
what if it doesn't work?
Yeah, and that can be everywhere in our lives. It can be with how we want to parent. It can be with we really want to go for a new job, or we want to ask for the pay rise, or we want to completely change our profession, or we want to go study. We want to dye our hair pink, whatever it is. And we don't do the thing.
Yes.
Yes. We want to get a tattoo, like whatever it is, like go do the thing, right? But we don't do it because of the inner critic. And what I'm really passionate about is giving women the tools to understand when that story comes up, that says, I'm not good enough to go and do this thing, or I'm not brave enough to go and ask that question or challenge, that conversation at work, whatever it is, that you have the tools, and really simple tools to say, what's the story I'm telling myself when I don't take that action? Is it actually true? It may be true. It may be completely false. And then, okay, how do I get to the action? How do I build a better story so I can go and live my life in my power rather than, sitting on the sidelines?
Oh, I'm just here going, yes. we all need a Megan, don't we?
Oh, bless you.
But it is. It's like, yay. When we can recognize or say, okay, this is what I'm telling myself here. No, it's not true. But then to put ourselves first, I think, is a massive challenge, because then that's still very much then going, well, I am worth this. I am going to put myself first to claim all of these things.
Yes.
It's hard.
It's really hard. And look, for a lot of women, saying I'm going to put myself first is a step too far, because it brings up so much of our conditioning around, well, you're not first. Like, your role as a woman in society is to be the mother, is to look beautiful, is to do all the things for all the people. It's not about you. That's what we're taught as women. So that, I'm going to put myself first on the list can feel like 50 steps too far. But to say, well, where am I on the list? And to actually just get myself on the list to start with, I think is a big leap for a lot of women. And then what would that look like? And what would the small steps be? If I was going to do something for myself this week, what would I do? If I had 10 minutes, if I had 30 minutes, what would I do? If I had one dream for my life, or even what am I curious about right now?
That word curious. I adore.
So beautiful, right?
I think we must remain curious through our whole lives, that wonderful kind of questioning, but it comes with wonder.
It does. I love that. And like, I'm 54 and I've just started my PhD. And it's because people are like, are you crazy? Like, you're already doing all the things. And I'm like, but I'm so curious about these things. And I have a love of learning as one of my strengths. So and I'm an academic. So like, that's the next step for me. So that curiosity, and if women could pinpoint, one thing, what are you curious about right now? What are you excited about right now? What's interesting to you? And if you picked up one breadcrumb on that path and did something for yourself, that's putting yourself on the list. So it doesn't need to be, I'm always looking for the small things rather than I have to change my whole life and I have to, I'm not going to worry about everybody else and I'm just going to think about me. Most women would never want to be or could get to that place. But we can look for the small moments, the small steps, the small things, and build from there. And that's a much easier, introduction to ourselves and what we want and who we are, and dealing with those stories that will stop us from doing even those small things.
The point you make about going for those small changes, I think is really important because often what can hold us back is, oh no, I can't possibly change everything. It's too difficult. It's too much at stake. But to do those, as you say, small practical steps, that will make a difference. Share with us what that also could look like. I know in your book you write about things like the importance of good nutrition, sleep, looking after our mental health. Tell us about that.
Yes, the well-being is very near and dear to my heart. I've had a very interesting journey with well-being. I had chronic fatigue when I was 21, and back then they didn't know what it was, and massive burnout in my mid-30s, and lots of other health challenges along the way. The work around well-being, I think, is our most important work to do. We're seeing epidemic levels of burnout amongst women, even worse than through the pandemic. This just consistent thread of burnout on all levels: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, carer burnout, all of the different angles. So for us to think about as women, and all genders, of course, but for my work, really focused on women, what are the well-being practices that you need? For all of us, it's sleep. For some, that's harder than others. If you've got young kids, you've got maybe aging parents, taking care of someone.
Menopause.
Let's
All that.
all the things that goes on forever. How do you get the sleep that you need? And what does that look like for you? For most of us, it's between 7 and 9 hours. How do you set yourself up for success? How do you build in an evening ritual and routine? How do you try and stabilize your sleep hours? What do you do, to cultivate the sleep versus trying to finish work, take care of the kids, look at the phone, and then wonder why we can't sleep, or we wake up at 3 a.m., right, with all of our stress hormones flooding. So sleep's incredibly important. Number one, movement. I like to talk about movement rather than just exercise. Like, how are we moving? The research tells us that sitting is the new smoking. We sit all day long and it has the same detrimental impact for our health.
Gee,
So
that's frightening, isn't
that
it?
frightening? It's like when you really think about that, and you think about, well, how often? Wow, 8 hours, 9 hours sitting at a desk for a lot of us, or sitting here, interviewing, podcasting. So how are we moving? How do we build that in? How do we do movement that just gets us up every half an hour, as well as the exercise that we do? And then nutrition. I mean, nutrition is such a minefield. I always just like to look at, what do you need? What does your body need? For me, I know I thrive on like green juice and Ayurvedic food. I don't eat meat because I don't feel good, when I eat meat. Like, what does that look like for each individual person, rather than the dogma of
You must eat
the
this.
whole
This is
wellness
what you need to
industry?
do.
Yes.
Because I must say, I do love a violet crumble in bed.
Oh my God, I love it. The best violet crumbles?
Oh.
The pack.
Yeah,
with
the
small
minis.
My childhood right there in the violet crumble pack, sitting with my parents watching TV.
So
Yes.
these practical tools that you talk about that we can use does help us silence or reframe, you're using your words there, inner critic, because then we're looking after ourselves more. I think if you were to ask most women, we know that in theory. We know logically, I need to do all of that. I know I need to do all of that, but I still don't do that. Why?
Well, if we were having a coaching conversation, I'd say, why, Jess? Why don't you do that? We all suffer from this, right? Some of it is our busyness. Some of it is we haven't built the healthy habits and the rituals and made them sticky. That we know that, okay, I'm going to get up, I'm going to brush my teeth, and then I'm going to go meditate. Like, that's a sticky habit because I'm habit stacking. So some of it's that. Some of it is We don't want to do the things that we've said we're going to do. And the very last thing women need in their lives is more shoulds.
Oh, yes. Should you
Mm.
write about this? The should, must do,
Yeah,
have
have
to. They are words that we tell ourselves, oh, I should be doing this. Oh, I must do that. I have to do
Yes.
that.
And then we
Why?
wonder why we don't do it,
Why do we
right?
do it though, Megan?
Yes. Well, it's not so much us, and that's the whole first part of the book where I talk about the patriarchy and the paradoxes of power that women live their lives by without even realizing, and how much of our lives are those shoulds, musts, and have tos that we constantly feel as women we're always being put upon to do things for other people. So then when we get to our healthy habits, oh, it's just another should. Oh, I've got to go drink the green juice, or I've got to go do this, or I should do this, or I should eat this, or I should go and exercise, or I
I must do
right?
this.
Or I must do this, or I won't be successful, or I have to do this for, for another person. And when we put all of these pieces together and we really get inside that inner critic, our big question, it's number one, how do we recognize it? How do we recognize what is this narrative that's going on for me? Is that true? Is that actually true? Is it even my voice? Or whose voice is my inner critic? Is it my mother? Is it my father? Is it my fifth grade school teacher? Who is the voice in my head? And there could be many.
And they can change,
And
can't
they
they?
will change. Absolutely, they will change. And then if I was going to soften into what do I want? What's true for me? And what would I do next? Then we start to move through. Yeah.
Even as you say that, yet again in this conversation, I'm feeling calmer.
I'm
And
so happy.
and I know our listeners are as well. Moving through, joy is a big one for you
Yes.
to help move through, and that really resonates with me. I search for joy, and I'm hopeful about joy. I always try and find that or bring that to everything I do.
Mm.
Why does it matter?
Yeah, and it's so interesting you say that because that comes through like when you're with you, when you listen to you, when you watch you, it is joyous. Like you are joyous. And I love that you've said that. For me, that wasn't the case. And I didn't look for joy. And I didn't feel, particularly in my corporate life, and as a young mum, as a single mum, there was no space for joy. I had joy in the moments, like with my child and things like that, but I was just on that treadmill.
It was hard work,
Hard work every day. Every day was just
the
a
grind.
slog. Yeah, the grind. And after my burnout, I like re-engineered my whole life. It took a long time. It didn't just happen, like it took a lot of conscious effort. But I started looking for where is the joy? Where do I cultivate the joy? Where is the joy in the moments? And it's one of the questions that in the thousands of women that I work with every year stumps them the most. When I say, if you were to follow the joy, what would you do next? And women, just like I did, get completely stumped. They're like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And then when I say, okay, go through your life for the next week, write down the moments of joy that you've had. And a lot of us really struggle with that. But we can cultivate it. As you say so beautifully, we can look for it. We can savor those moments of joy. And when we savor them, they amplify. And then, we get more of them. But we all need more joy in our
we
lives,
do.
particularly as women, when we're so invested in everybody else. What brings joy to us? I know like when I meditate, I feel joyful. When I walk on the beach and swim in the ocean, I feel joyful. When I look at the stars, I feel joyful. When I go for a walk in the bush, joyful. There's so many moments, big and small, the perfect chai latte, joy, right? Like where are they? And what we put our attention on grows, as we know. So I think joy is a really important thing for us to put our attention on.
And to be almost unapologetic about saying, I deserve this joy.
Yes.
Why can't I? Why can't and also what I've come to realize over time is it's not the big moments. It's not sort of it doesn't mean, oh, I've got to get on a plane and go to this exotic
No,
destination.
no.
It's those small things,
Yes.
daily things in our lives that make your heart sing. That's how I
Mm.
like to look at it. And I mean, I do daggy, stupid stuff each morning, and my daughters and husband are like, oh my God, what is she doing? What song or dance routine is she doing? But I do that for me because it brings me joy. It's not
Yes.
about doing it for other people.
Yes. And I do similar things. Before I coach, I like to put on a song and I dance around in my thing. And my son walks upstairs and he shakes his head and walks to his bedroom, but it is. And like, how do we build in those moments? Because the busyness of life strips it out.
It does.
It really does.
And
we have
it's
to be
hard.
conscious. Yeah.
There's a lot of life, a lot of things that people are going through that are tough, awful, heartbreaking things.
Yeah.
And when you're in the midst of all of that, it can be very hard to then find the joy. There'll be people listening who might be looking for that or thinking, how do I start? Where do I go? How can I silence my inner critic? I know there's so much that you cover, Megan, in your beautiful book, but what is some advice that you could leave them with?
Yes, beautiful question. I would say, number one, start thinking about you and what you want for yourself. And, people might need to really gear themselves up to give themselves that permission and space. You don't need to go on retreat. You don't need 6 hours on a Sunday. You can take 30 minutes, go sit under a tree and just think about, like, what do I want for myself right now? What would feel good for me? What would joy look like? What would I like to have in my life that I don't have in my life? And small things, right? Small things. And something big might come out. Oh, I want to change my career. But often, as you say, which I really believe it's the small moments. So that's always, for me, the first thing. Try and get some clarity around your vision. Then the second thing is, as we're talking about with our big question around the inner critic, is start listening to your stories and start trying to catch the stories that you're telling. And even for a week or 2 weeks, just get a little notebook or write it on your app on your phone, write them down. I was walking into the studio today and I was thinking, oh gosh, am I going to say anything interesting? Story. Like, what are they for you? Because once we bring our attention to that, then we can start to quieten, move through, get to the other side of doing the things we want to do, being who we want to be, and living the life that we truly want to live, so that we don't end up looking back going, oh, if only I was braver, or if only I had put myself on the list, if only I had lived the life that I truly wanted for myself, which is the number one regret of the dying from Bronnie Ware's book, My Beautiful Friend. I didn't live the life that I wanted to live. I lived the life others expected of me. So yeah, and just do the small things. Do the small things for yourself that put you on the list and that build your sense of agency and self-worth and power, that you deserve it. You deserve to live how you want to live and have the things that you want. And we can do it in really small steps.
Megan, thank you for giving us the tools to get ourselves on the list. And I've learnt so much talking with you. I've learnt so much reading your beautiful book, Women Rising. And I can't wait to do more with my life, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jess. Beautiful, beautiful conversation. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Women Rising is the must-read manifesto for women. It's time to reclaim your power. This book is your compass.